Welcome back. My name is Daniel Atkinson. I'm one of the programmers here at the MCA. Thank you all for coming out. Have you all had a good time? Do you think we should do this again? All right, so I need your help. I'm going to be very transparent right now. One of the things that helps us do these programs is butts and seats, but another thing that helps us is your voice. So if you can, please let us know on social media. We're going to be sending out a survey later. I hate surveys, but please don't leave it in your junk mail. Fill it out, because we're going to use that. So thank you. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you especially to the Deem folks. They're the most amazing group of folks that I feel like we've had the chance to work with. And I'm getting a little emotional because it's been so much care that they've given us and trust, and I just appreciate you all, so thank you. I also want to give it up to all the staff here that's working at MCA right now. There's a lot of folks that make this happen. Can we get a round of applause for everyone else whose work is on scene? All right, up next to talk is Ramon Tejada. Y'all know who Ramon is. Ramon's got MFAs. Ramon works at the Rhode Island School of Design, a professor there. There's a lot more to say, but I'm going to let Ramon do all the talking. So if you could please join me in welcoming to the podium Ramon Tejada.
Thank you. That's like the coolest intro. Usually people just read the bio, and I'm like, please don't read it. It's not that. Hi, everyone. So I'm Ramon Tejada, and I'm going to probably look a little bit here. The screens are glitching a little bit. But I'm going to talk about pedagogy, and that's a really scary word to talk about because I don't have an education degree. I have 2 MFAs, Masters of Fine Arts. I have other names that we came up in grad school for what that means, but I can't say them here. So I make stuff. That's why graphic design, that's what I love to do. And I also teach at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, which I also love teaching, and I realized that really early on, that I really love teaching, which usually just translates to, I like to share and I like to hang out with people. That's what really that's all about. That's my methodology, by the way. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about puncturing or making spaces. And this GIF, you're going to see a lot of GIFs here. I love GIFs from jiffy.com, so thank you to all the people that make a lot of really creative stuff. You give me a lot of life. I found this when I was trying to think about what I was trying to do with my practice, and this is sort of the way I think of design. This is what I think design needs to be. I don't think design needs to be that minimalist thing that I studied in school and that I think a lot of us studied. To me, design is this messy, beautiful, convoluted levee exploding in all its glory. So I'm going to take you through some wild things. Hello, hi. One of the things I like to do is to put my parents in funny things. Those are my parents as a pattern I made during the pandemic. They're in there. They're in the Caribbean right now with their 86 and 84-year-old selves hanging out outside. So I've been trying to figure out how to bring these people into my work. They don't speak English, they're immigrants, so forth and so on, that beautiful narrative. But I'm a graphic designer, and I like to make things. I like typography, and I like to be sort of exuberant and make really flashy, loud things, or not. So as a graphic designer and as a teacher, what I've decided that I like to do is to puncture things, meaning I need to make a big old space for a bunch of ideas and people whose work needs to be there, and I should have encountered, or I can, with my skill, make and elevate. So this is some graphic design that I'm doing right now, and I'm really sort of explicitly focusing on making work with other BIPOC creatives, or about BIPOC themes specifically. I've sort of stopped. I have the privilege of being able to say that I'm just not going to take every other project that comes along as a graphic designer, which is a lot of pressure that people get. So yeah, but we're going to talk about some definitions. Told you there's some GIFs coming. I couldn't find the right Angela Bassett from Waiting to Exhale GIF for this, so Beyonce had to do, okay? So we're gonna talk about some definitions, because one of the things that I think it's really critically important is that we define what we're talking about. Because otherwise, I think we're just sort of trafficking in generic, whatever you wanna call it. It's like, and I specifically think a lot about graphic design. You know, we use the term like audience. Who's an audience? Historically, an audience has been a white guy in his 30s. That doesn't account for most of us in this room. So if that is your audience, then, well, okay. So I think it's important. So puncturing, a definition here, creates gaps, spaces, and holes for the local, the ethnic, the non-Anglo, the non-Western, the non-European to take space. It creates possibilities and fosters pluralistic imagination. And the word puncturing, I studied theater in undergrad, so I read a lot of Shakespeare, or as John Leguizamo says, Shaka Perez. You know, Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, made up some really good, juicy insults, if you remember English class. So I wanted that word that just, like, that's what I wanted to do, right? So that's why the puncture. Some people's like, it's so violent. I'm like, yeah, it is, on purpose. Because design likes to be like, oh, yeah, we're gonna give you a little book today, and then, you know, 2 years later, we're still talking about the same thing. No, like, can we just break the levee? Okay, so it asks us to actively define and or redefine our accepted standards and foundations. And these are two words that sort of in an art and design context I think are really problematic. We have a lot of standards that we have to deal with, and if you went to art school, you know that you usually go through foundation, and I have a lot of questions about that because I kind of want to know whose foundation you're talking about, because we all didn't have the same foundation. So, you know, that's important. That piece that you see back there is a semi-caoba stand, which is a Taino artifact from the Dominican Republic, where I actually was born, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But this piece of work, talk about this earlier this morning when some of the work gets seen as like, this has been at the Met for many years in sort of that kind of weird space when you go to the Met and you're like, is this anthropology? Because it's that other thing, you know, it's like that other culture, so it's not really design because they don't know what they were doing. They just did a recent show where this piece is one of the oldest artifacts that they actually own, one of the pieces they own that is worth the most. This is the oldest artifact that we have from the American hemisphere. And the semis were made by the Tainos, who are pretty much non-existent because the Europeans slaughtered them as they slaughtered a lot of indigenous tribes. These artifacts could take any shape, and they were meant to be sacred artifacts. So this could be a piece of paper, or it could be a piece of wood like this. So they could give the object that sort of holy, special thing that it could communicate with the higher beings. So puncturing as a method is a method for making for me, and also a pedagogy, right? And it's just an approach to teach, right? This is John Leguizamo back there in Latin History for Morons, which I saw in New York as a workshop, and I was like, I need to do that. That's what I want to do, what he just did, which was to completely just give me the best history lesson I've never had because I saw myself. So another definition, not as exciting as Beyonce, right? Sorry. So a lot of this falls under this, what I would call the umbrella of decolonizing, which is, for many people, it's like a buzzword. It's like, I don't know what that is, right? I didn't know what it was either, okay? And I messed it up a few times, including in public, which was really interesting conversations after you give a talk. And somebody comes in and is like, you don't know what you're talking about. So it can mean many things to many people. It's really depending on where you're coming from, okay? So if you're talking about decolonization in an American context, that's one thing. If you're talking about decolonization in South America, in Peru, in Mexico, that's a different thing. If you are in Southeast Asia, that's a different manifestation. It's very pluralistic. So, but for me, And again, this idea of defining it for yourself, I think that's important. I ask the students all the time, I want you to start to define that, what it is that you're trying to talk about. Decolonizing is about physical visibility, structural change, representation, not tokenism. I'm not interested in being your token. Acknowledgement of ideas, land, values that were stolen, repressed, etc. Giving up, sometimes taking the space. Sometimes we do have to take the space because they don't give it up. It is about responsible expansion, and I put that in quotes. Recognizing what design has ignored and not valued. Recognizing narratives, points of views, perspectives, stories, theories, ideas, geographical references, not just of Northern European and American lineages, which erases everybody else's identity, which is just colonialism again, played out. A diversity of lineages, not just the Bauhaus and all of its grandchildren, because the Bauhaus does have a lot of grandchildren that pretend that they're not the Bauhaus, but it is. Repackaged, because it's still the same three people talking, and for the record, I do love parts of the Bauhaus. I was there 2 summers ago and I was drooling. The guards were giving me, because it's a beautiful building. But the narrative is the complicated piece, what we get. It is about unearthing, shifting the glance and decentering, giving agency, being vulnerable, making mistakes. I made tons of mistakes. Thinking about our communities, not the design community. As a designer, I am not interested in talking or making stuff for other designers. That is the least interesting thing to me. But if I want to talk to you, I have your phone number, and we can go have dinner, and that's a really fun dinner. Or if I want your thing that you made, I would just call you and say, I really want one. What do I need to do to get that, right? I think it's important to think about mom, dad, grandparents, your neighbor, our chosen families, and acknowledging not knowing and making the periphery the center, which is a total stolen line from Toni Morrison. Some of you may have, that's a really famous quote of hers about shifting the center, right? And making her own center rather than one center. There isn't one center, there's multiples. Okay, so we're gonna talk about expansions, and we're gonna learn how to love, because part of what I had to do was learn how to love some things that I did not take time to love while I was studying in my bougie little art and design context of learning about the Bauhaus and all that stuff, right? So bell hooks taught me a lot, as I think she's taught a lot of us a lot, but it's not something that I studied in design school, just for the record. I learned about bell hooks on my own and through engagement with some of you, or through Instagram with some of your Instagrams where you were postings, and I'm like, oh, I gotta read that, okay? So I'm a graphic designer again, and I love graphic design, but as a designer, as a graphic designer, I have come to terms with the fact that what and who design history has been interested in canonizing up to this point does not reflect me, my cultures, my values, and many of the tenets that make me a citizen, a designer, and a teacher. I don't see myself reflected in much of the narrative of design, not in the history, the theory, the practitioners, or the outcomes. I wrote that, I didn't remember I wrote that for a piece at the Walker Art Center, and friends of mine started texting me, it's like, wow, can we use this? I'm like, what did I say? I don't know what I said. And it's true, I had no idea. So a lot of this came out of the day after the elections in 2016. And I had to go teach. And I said, I have to change everything. I cannot teach that way. I also could not go to marches and say I want, social justice, equal rights, and all this, and then go teach that stuff that design has taught me to teach. So I had to rethink that, right? So I learned a lot of what you see up there, right? On the right-hand side, your left-hand side, sorry. That is what graphic design teaches you. It's you need to learn that Swiss, exacting Swiss mathematic things. I love some of that. That's Joseph Mueller-Brockman. And I also love Wolfgang Weingart, who was like, no, I don't, I got my own thing. I'm like some other kooky, crazy person who got kicked out of school, but also became another sort of seminal figure as a graphic designer. But what I didn't study was the stuff that showed up that I remember is in my neighborhood, the Dominican posters that show up in the DR. If any of you have gone to the DR, you see these posters, and you wonder, how were they made? Well, they punch the heck out of them with ink through, and there's a really great video that I'll share with you all. And then the other poster is from La Guelaguetza in Oaxaca in Mexico. And this is the poster that gets put up for this massive festival, which is a very, very big part of the Oaxacan state, and it's a huge festival of multiple communities. And it's one of the most beautiful posters I've ever seen on the street. It was repasted so I couldn't take it down, and I couldn't find who printed it because it's actually, you don't even know who made it. And it's all community printed. So it's not like, oh, I'm the designer, I made the cool poster, you can call me and I'll send you one. No, it's like, yeah, the community made it. This is what they wanted. So part of this is digging and unearthing my lineage, just really looking, right? Maya just talked about an hour ago about looking and just looking at things, right? Several of you have mentioned it as well. So I have James Baldwin. I always say Jimmy Baldwin, like I knew him or something, but it's like Jimmy Baldwin, hey, Jimmy. And I'm also super inspired by some of the thoughts that he talked about. Somebody was writing about digging through, unearthing that thing where you're from. Also to the incredible Gloria Ansaldúa, who I did not study in school, just randomly happened to show up in a talk that somebody gave, and I was like, who's that? And then I read her book, and my brain exploded. And it was just like, why did I not read that? I should have read that, right? Sister Corita Kent, who some of you may know, in Los Angeles was teaching and was just known as like the nun who taught and paint and like did some silkscreens instead of like the artist that she is. And a lot of the methodologies that she was sort of engaging the students, which is like to engage with other people, engage with your neighbors, engage and think that way. And the Dominican performance artist Josefina Baez, who has this whole process of sort of thinking about digging through your culture and the importance of that. So again, like I said, I was born in the Dominican Republic, DR, but I actually grew up in New York City. I came to the US when I was really young. So I'm kind of a Dominican York is what I came to the term. And there's a lot of like conversations about this Dominicanness, Jamaican York, but you know, so I dug up a little bit. This picture back there, that's like the Dominican picture, like you're in the Caribbean. That's actually the foundation of Christopher Columbus's first house in the New World. That's where he went, that's where he landed, and that's where he decided to put, you see that little sort of behind the tree, there's that foundation? That is all that's left of his house. And this is a park there that you can go. Nobody was there except for my dad and I and the caretaker and his wife who'd caretake this. And you see all the foundation of the first settlement. And I sort of felt that I needed to go there to figure out what was going on. There's another building that has some indigenous artifacts, which are not taken care of at all. They're just sort of left out. So the question that I ended up with was like, does my history, lineage, experiences, stories, ways of seeing and understanding matter to design? Well, the answer is really obviously clear. Yes, it does. But it takes a while for you to figure out that, oh, right, that's what I need to be talking about rather than I need to be talking about, you know, looking at the world through some Swiss guy's eyes, which I'm not Swiss, right? Like, or German or, you know, Dutch or American, which is what a lot of design ends up, you know, like sort of, that's our examples. So I just started digging through things. I like to mark things. I like tape a lot. The conversation about the border is really an interesting one to me because I feel the Dominican Republic, if you know, the island is split between Haiti and the DR, and that border is actually a really contentious space, which last time I went with my dad, I was like, I can't, it's so problematic. To me, physically felt really horrible to be there because of the way that the Haitian people are treated, particularly the women are treated really horribly by the police. So I started to dig through that. Take some pictures. I go visit my parents, and I just take a lot of pictures, sometimes of my dad's pigeon party. He started feeding the pigeons. So they show up at 3 o'clock on the dot every day. It's ridiculous. And if he's not there, they start screaming and crying, whatever they do. And if he doesn't come out, then they go into like the patio, and then they start trying to crouch into the house. I'm like, stop feeding them. He's like, too late, right? So I started to sort of make things, graphic design, artifacts, what I call. And one of the things I ended up with is like, oh, I have to deal with language because some of the things that I'm actually interested in are these words that were screamed out in my house all the time. If you speak Spanish, some of you know some of these words. And some of these words translate differently depending on the Latin American country you're in. So some of them are a little kind of shady words. But I wanted to play with them in a way that I was told I was not allowed to play with as a graphic designer. So all of this stretching that you see, that's like a no-no in graphic design. That's like, you don't stretch the letter. That is wrong. And that like authoritative wrong, no thing is something that I think I'm just not interested in. Like, who am I to tell you that that's wrong, like, as a teacher? Like, that is your decision to start to play with and start to think about the ramifications of you stretching letters. What does that mean, right? And in some cultures, stretching the letter is really good. Guess what? And I've made a bunch of variations. This is the last variation, my favorite, which is vinyl at the RISD Museum. But I love vinyl, but I'm not installing it. So I'll only do it if I have an installer, because it's just too much work, especially when it's that large. So this is sort of like a big dump of all the stuff that I had to engage with, okay? This is like a big board of like, I have to read all of this stuff. By the way, I should have said this. All those lovely pictures you're all taking right now, I love it, but at the end there's gonna be a QR code which takes you to this presentation, and everything is linked. So there's a bunch of links, and you can just click on them. So this is just like, this is the mess. This is, to me, this is like the most beautiful thing, because you kind of just have to dig through it. And I love that idea that I don't have to clean it up for you. You can do the digging yourself, because what is necessary for me to know might not be what you need in order to make the work you need to make, right, as a teacher. Like, I may be fascinated with, I don't know, the color blue, but that color means nothing to you, right? So there's a lot of things that, a lot of people, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, like talking about ancestors, Leguizamo, the Sumaya Valley interview from Deem, which literally, I lost it for 2 days, no joke. Allison, I'm not kidding you. Like 2 days, I was like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? So yeah, lots of really interesting things. And then engaging with the idea of the beloved community, which is an idea that comes from Martin Luther King, which I encountered in a faculty workshop at RISD with this institution in Providence called the Center for Reconciliation. And I thought this was the most incredible piece of paper. You see, actually, that's my paper with the doodles that I did on it. I always share with people because I'm like, no, I can type it out for you, that's cool, but I think I want you to see the paper because we were really interested in how do you create spaces that develops beloved communities and what that means, which I think is an idea also that our new president, Krista Williams, is also sort of speaking about for the school, sort of like beloved community spaces where we nourish each other and support each other and love each other and bring each other up. So all of that ended up, that was beginning research for this Decolonizing design reader that I started to work on. That was the first edition of it, is that poster over there to the left. I'm being staged, I forgot my stage, left, yes, your left. That was the first edition, which was a poster for a talk I gave at Pratt in the art history department. That was the scariest thing I've ever done. I'm not a historian. Which was literally put together from talking to a bunch of friends. Because I love that idea of talking with friends as I'm working on a project. It really makes a huge difference. It ended up being a printed edition, which is what you see moving to on the right here, that I was asked by Callie Nikitas at Otis College of Art and Design, where I went to grad school. Callie said, we're having a book fair, can you make the reader into a printed piece? I'm like, it's not, it's a bunch of links. Nobody's gonna, okay, if you look at it, it's a bunch of links. Who's gonna sit down and type all these links? I don't know, good luck if you do that. But it's totally useless, but it's fascinating because I just sat down and I just went typographic nuts because I can do that, right? Flash how good I am as a typographer. I'm a really good designer, darn it. Okay, but the real version of this is this Google Doc. That's where the real thing is. Go and, it's alive, you can contribute to it, and you just click, and nothing's organized. And I've resisted the organization of it 3 times. I was on sabbatical last spring, and it was my project. I'm gonna organize it into a better organizational system, and I said no. Because you know what? You need to do the work. I don't need to do the work for you, and I don't know what work you wanna do. Who am I to assume that I know what you want to learn about, right? I just want to share with you so that you have it, right? So we're going to take a pause for a second. Rosie Perez, just, breathe. Do the right thing, fight the power. This is pretty amazing. This movie is kind of unbelievable to this day. It holds so well, right? So puncturing as a method and a process. It's very messy. It's beautiful. Yes, that is Kermit. I love Kermit the Frog, okay? It is slow. It is collaborative. It's about ideating, okay? It is non-linear. Like, there is no, like, whoever said that everything's linear, forget about that. That's definitely not it. It's about not knowing. Like, honestly, during the pandemic, I realized it's just too much to know it all, okay? I'm a firm believer. You know that moment when we were all in school and we're like, oh yeah, I read that book. No, I didn't. You didn't either, you liar. But we all lied our teeth, right? Like, I'm gonna say this, right? So like, I'm in art and design, and I'm like, oh, did you read Foucault? No, I did not read Foucault. Okay, no. Ready? No, I did not. You know who taught me Foucault? It was impenetrable, first of all, okay? To me, to my ESL, whatever brain, it was, but bell hooks taught me about it. So sometimes you need somebody else, another window, another portal to teach you the thing that you need to know, or a way to engage with it. So this assumption that we have, like, you need to read that. It's like, I don't know about that, right? So it's about unlearning and resisting the temptation to clean it up. Like, who are you to tell me to clean it up and that it doesn't look good because it doesn't look the way you want it, right? Like, I don't know, like, who said that, right? Stop making it universal. I hate that word, right? Like, I understand the idea, but it makes no sense to me because we're all different people. We have different sets of eyes. We have different values. We grow up differently. Even if we grow up in the same neighborhood, even if we grow up in the same house, we may end up having different ways of looking at the world, right? So the idea of universality, which in graphic design, it's heavy, is the history of it, right? And this idea of being reductive. If your solution to everything is a little black dot in a field of what? White space. I hate that phrase, so I'm killing that phrase. In a field of space, if that's your solution to the world, moveon.org. It just doesn't work for me anymore. And it's about us defining and redefining things on our own terms, right? And like for our communities and for the people that we want to make work for and with, okay? It's about playing and tinkering. I love the word tinkering because it reminds me of being a kid and how much tinkering a lot of us did, even if we just had like some pencils, right? And ultimately it's about joy. Like ultimately it's about joy. It's about making somebody laugh. It's about making yourself laugh or cry or have an emotion or be like human. Like we're making work that like touches people. Whether you're making a poster or whether you're making a building or whether you're making a plane or whatever you're making, whether a meal. Right, like you give people a lot of joy when you share it beautifully. Bye, Kermit. So we're going to talk about expansions part 2. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of the way that I've done things with teaching to sort of try to do this in the classroom because people are always like, oh, how do you do that in the classroom? And people always ask, what does this look like? I don't know what this looks like, okay? Because we're just making it up. We spend so much time thinking about the other thing that we have libraries and libraries and libraries and libraries to show you that thing, but then we have like a lot of empty shelves of a lot of amazing people that are making work right now that will feel that and show us examples of that. So this was one of the first iterations of sort of like thinking through this idea of puncturing. So I had to teach a class at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design at MCAD online before Zoom. Yes, it existed. Some of us were doing it. And it was like, oh, we want to talk about design history. Ramon, can you do this? I'm like, oh, okay. We're going to take a Google Sheet, and we're going to do a collective design history. Because perhaps what I think you need to know is not what you need to know to make the work you want to make, right? So every different color you see here is a different student's contributions. And what you're not seeing here that's the most interesting was the conversations, because the conversations is where all the linking and the paths were created, right? The yellow is the stuff that I marked that I thought was important for them to know, and I realized that I would do it differently now, because I gave them too much of those things that I thought were important. And for some of them, they're like, yeah, I know that, but it's not a reference or it's important to me. So that was pretty fascinating, and I really love Google Docs and Google Sheets and things like that, and I know there's issues with Google, but I'm gonna use them. Because it does make it accessible to a lot of people. Not to everybody, like it's not accessible to everyone. Let's not forget about that part. Because we talk about accessibility, but there's a lot of people that it just is never gonna be accessible to, right? This was teaching at RISD. This is color and surface, so I teach it sometimes. I'm not teaching it this semester. And it's an interesting structure for the class. It's one of the classes where we actually have a different structure where a group of faculty get together and we rotate the students. So each of us teaches for like, if we have four classes, 4 groups, and there's 4 faculty, each faculty teaches one particular unit, and then we just rotate every like 3 weeks. So the students get different perspectives on color. It is not just this sort of design, Joseph Albert's color situation, right? And then I'm really interested in you could argue a decolonial approach to talking about color and complicating it. So one of the things that I was really I went to Peru and I went to a little store in Cusco, and these little cards were just like right by the cash register. They're just this stack of cards, and I told the lady, oh, can I get one? She's like, oh, you can take them, they're free. So I was like, wow, it's amazing. These are the expressions of colors for the people, the Inca people, right? Like this is how they think about color, right? Not this sort of like pseudo-scientific thing that the Europeans got all obsessed about, right? They think about these expressions. It actually translates to expressions of color, which I thought was really beautiful. So I share a lot different ways of thinking about colors and what colors mean to different cultures, because it doesn't mean the same thing. There's actually a lot of research about that. There's some cultures that don't even see some colors, actually, that we see, and we think that we do. But thinking about when you use a color, if you have to be really thoughtful about, because you may end up using the wrong color for the wrong place, right? Like you haven't had a conversation with that community, so you use it and you're like, it's dead on arrival because it doesn't speak to them, right? Which begs, again, to so much about the conversations that you have to have with so many people and a constant channel of conversation. So this is one of the students, Mahek, who did this project that I give them, which is I need you to bring a picture that's really important to you from home. Don't bring me some like, oh, this is my favorite piece of design. Not interested in that. You got to dig in. She brought in her parents' picture when they met, and it's the little picture there at the bottom, it's like large. And then she made a painting of it for their 25th wedding anniversary as their gift. And then she started going through a process of pulling out all the colors out of it and started to develop narratives and talking about why these colors mean the things they mean for her based on where she's coming from India and her parents, and sort of started to work with that palette rather than thinking, oh, this thing is, red means that, and, like yellow means that. So it's going through a narrative to get at developing your own sort of lexicon, your own way of looking at things, okay? And then this is sort of a different variation of the Google Sheet, which is actually a puncturing workshop that I've done a few of them at, and this is at CUP in Brooklyn, where I spent I think it was like 5 hours with 18 designers that are part of their design cohort that they do, talking about all these issues that we have as designers, dealing with material, and dealing with working with communities to make things for communities using these ideas of graphic design or design that sometimes make no sense in those communities. So how to navigate that and how to actually sort of unpack and unlearn some of that. So it's a lot of conversation. As you see, there's some repeat offenders that you've seen in other slides here because, Octavia just shows up everywhere these days. Octavia was like, wow, right? So a lot of conversations, again, lots of links, and this actually continues. They actually continue these and continue the conversation. I follow it, but it's a lot about sharing. And then there's some collaborations that you do, which is just about sharing knowledge with tons of joy, which I love to do. To me, teaching is about sharing knowledge. That's what it comes down to. It's like my pedagogy is, okay, let's share some stuff. Let's try some stuff. Let's make some stuff. Let's experiment. Let's analyze it. Let's reflect on it. Let's think about it. Does it make sense? Is it saying, doing the thing that in your head you thought about? Okay. So some of the collaborations means that, when I'm designing, I kind of like want to hang out with you. So this is the artist Helena Metaferia in New York at her studio when I was doing her catalog. And I'm like, hey, your process of collage, I kind of want to play it out as a graphic designer. Can we do that? She's like, yeah. So I just went down with a whole set of proofs of the catalog, and we had a good old time chopping it up and talking about it, because I'm also not interested in like, oh, I know all of this, and you just hired me to do this. I don't want that relationship. I want the relationship where I'm actually engaging with you, and I'm a collaborator with you, rather than you just say, could you make it look pretty? If you say to me, make it look pretty, I'm done. See you later. Find somebody else for that. There's plenty of people to do that. This is some images from throwing the Bauhaus under the bus that I did a series of workshops with my friend Salas Monroe. This is at Otis College of Art and Design in LA in the MFA program. And we're really interested in doing an entire studio where we were sort of like critiquing and examining these ways that we've been taught to make form as graphic designers. And so we literally sort of like told them, do everything the opposite of all that stuff, and let's see what starts to happen. From things from Lineage Index, we gave them an assignment about lineage maps to like think about your lineage and sort of try to visualize that. To that orb in the middle is the student's conversations with her mother in Saudi Arabia. And if I don't play the sound because if you hear the sound, I did not need to know what mom was saying, but I knew that was mom. And mom had some certain opinions. Her mother's an architect. She's like, my mom's an architect, and she has a lot of opinions about everything I make. I'm like, I could just tell from it. It was beautiful. That is one student's work, which actually was this sort of this series of like metal sculptures that he had made, because his uncle had a metalsmithing shop in LA, so he's been doing that since he was a little kid. And then he just spent the weekend with his uncle making stuff again and brought it all in. And we were like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And then ultimately the final outcomes were just these digitized versions of those sort of like, we call them sculptures because they had that lovely feel to it. And that's me at the Bauhaus hanging out. And then with Silas again and Polymode, Silas started the BIPOC design history class. Black Design in America was the first round of it, and then I did a second edition of it. I curated it. It's called Incomplete Latinx Stories of Diseño Gráfico. Incomplete, a massive undertaking. You need like 30 versions of this to even try to scratch at like the complexity of everything, right? But again, it's just with an amazing group of people, talented designers. This is my friend Carlos and I. We met in grad school. We are still hanging out. We hang out all the time when we can, digitally and or physically. And we did this whole introduction about arte y diseño latinx comunicación cotidiana, which is where we sort of honed in on like the everyday artifacts of graphic design that show up in neighborhoods. Because that to us is like the most exciting graphic design that a lot of people try to copy, by the way, and appropriate, right? So collaborations and discussions and conversations that continue for a long time. So some notes to end with. Lovely scan of Octavia Butler's notebooks. I don't know if any of you have seen these. There's a lot of them online. It's incredible. Her notes, I'm like, can somebody print that book out, please? It's amazing. Make people feel. Like, that's our job. Like, make people feel. Like, it's so incredible. Thank you, Octavia. So think about who am I or who are you making with, not for. Change that relationship, right? Who am I making for, not who am I making with? It's collaboration. Explore, activate lowercase design and lowercase art to build, value, and center communities. Spike Lee again, do the right thing. Okay? Think about whose voices or stories are you or are we elevating as a community, right? Are we elevating the same voice over and over and over? That's Celia Cruz. I really wanted to play her in this presentation, but I'm always cautious of sound. Okay, but that's Celia Cruz. Okay? And, make in collaboration, make it respectful, and make it with joy. That's Chespirito. If any of you Latinos in the house remember Saturday morning, this is what we used to watch, right? This is the thing that I'm obsessed with. I even have the t-shirt. It's amazing. And then make with mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, your chosen family, your community. There they are in the 60s, being hip and trendy somewhere. I don't know where they were. So thank you very much. Here's a whole slew of resources. They're all links, by the way. And you can get all of this. So thank you so much.